We are often taught that speaking English is about grammar, vocabulary, or perfect pronunciation. But the real barrier is never language. The real barrier is the voice inside that says, "What if I make a mistake? And what will people think?" Today, let's break that silence. The truth is simple: English is not a talent, it is a practice. And practice begins the moment you decide that your fear will no longer speak louder than your voice. The first key point is stop waiting for perfection. Many people never speak because they are waiting for the perfect sentence or perfect accent. But perfection is a myth that keeps your tongue locked. Speak broken English if you must, but speak. Because broken English spoken with confidence is far more powerful than perfect English buried in fear. Every fluent speaker today was once a beginner who made mistakes without apology. Stop waiting for perfection, because perfection is the quiet poison that delays every dream, especially the dream of speaking a new language. Many people carry this invisible weight inside them, this belief that before they speak English, they must first become flawless, as if fluency is a gate that only opens for those who never stumble. But language was never designed for perfection. It was designed for connection. It was created so human beings could understand each other, not so they could judge each other's grammar under a spotlight of fear. Think about how a child learns to speak their mother tongue. The child does not wait to learn grammar rules. The child does not pause to calculate sentence structure. The child simply speaks, even if words are broken, even if pronunciation is unclear, even if sentences fall apart in the middle. And yet, that child is never stopped by fear of being judged. Because at that stage, expression is more important than perfection. Somewhere along the way, we lose that innocence. We grow up and suddenly start believing that every word we say must be correct before it deserves to be spoken. This mindset becomes the biggest cage. It creates hesitation. It creates silence. A person knows words, understands meanings. But when it comes to speaking, the mind becomes heavy, the tongue becomes tied, and the fear of mistake becomes louder than the desire to express. That moment is not a lack of knowledge. It is a lack of permission given to oneself. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to grow in public. Permission to sound unfinished while still learning. Waiting for perfection is like waiting for the ocean to stop moving before you learn how to swim. It will never happen. Water is meant to move, and language is meant to evolve. Every fluent speaker you admire once stood exactly where you stand now, unsure, hesitant, overthinking every word, replaying sentences in their mind before speaking them out loud. The difference between those who remain stuck and those who grow is not talent. It is action taken before readiness arrives. When a person speaks imperfect English, something powerful happens that most people fail to notice. They are not failing, they are building neural pathways of confidence. Each imperfect sentence is training the brain to think in a new rhythm. Each mistake is a small crack in the wall of fear. Over time, those cracks widen, and suddenly what once felt impossible begins to feel natural. But this transformation only happens when speech is allowed to happen freely, not when it is locked behind the demand for perfection. Perfection also creates comparison. A person starts measuring their speaking ability against native speakers, against fluent presenters, against people who have been practicing for years. And in that comparison, their own progress disappears from sight. They forget that language is not a competition, it is a journey. No one reaches fluency overnight, and no one's starting point looks impressive. Every voice begins with hesitation. Every speaker begins with mistakes that feel embarrassing in the moment, but become lessons in hindsight. There is also a hidden truth about mistakes that people rarely accept in the beginning. Most mistakes are not as visible to others as they feel to us. What feels like a huge error inside the mind often passes unnoticed in real conversation. People are not analyzing every verb, every tense, every pronunciation. They are listening for meaning, for intention, for connection. And when intention is strong, language becomes flexible. Communication fills the gaps that perfection tries to control. Letting go of perfection is not about lowering standards. It is about shifting focus. Instead of focusing on how correct every word is, the focus moves toward whether the message is being expressed. Instead of asking, "Is this perfect?" the question becomes, "Is this understood?" That small shift changes everything. It frees the speaker from paralysis and brings movement into speech. And movement is where growth begins. Even hesitation has value. Even pauses have meaning. Even broken sentences carry progress within them. Because every time a person chooses to speak despite imperfection, and they are training courage, and courage is not loud in the beginning, it starts quietly, in small moments where fear is present but ignored. It starts in conversations where the heart beats faster, but the voice still comes out anyway. Embracing mistakes as teachers begins with changing the way we define mistakes in the first place. Most people see a mistake as something negative, something to hide, something that proves they are not good enough. But in reality, every mistake is a message. It is not a stop sign. It is a signpost pointing toward improvement. When someone is learning to speak English, mistakes are not interruptions in learning. They are the very process of learning itself. Without mistakes, there is no evidence that effort is happening. And without effort, there is no growth. Every incorrect sentence carries information. It shows what part of language is still unfamiliar, what sound needs more practice, what structure needs more attention. Instead of being ashamed of it, a learner can treat it like feedback. A mistake is not a judgment of intelligence. It is a reflection of experience level. Just like a child falls many times before learning to walk, language learners also fall through words before they learn to speak fluently. No one questions the child's ability to walk in the future because of those early falls. Yet adults question their own ability after a single spoken mistake, which shows how harsh we become with ourselves when learning something new. When a person makes a mistake in speaking English, there is often an immediate emotional reaction. A feeling of embarrassment, a rush of self-doubt, a sudden desire to stop speaking altogether. But that emotional reaction is not the truth of the situation. It is just fear responding to growth. Because every time you step outside your comfort zone, fear tries to pull you back. And mistakes are often proof that you have stepped outside that comfort zone. So instead of seeing them as failure, they can be seen as progress indicators, small signals that the learning process is active and alive. Fluent speakers are not people who never made mistakes. They are people who made countless mistakes and continued anyway. The difference is not in the absence of error, but in the response to error. Some people make a mistake and stop speaking. Others make a mistake, notice it, and continue speaking. That continuation is where transformation happens. Because fluency is not built in perfect moments, it is built in imperfect persistence. Every corrected sentence, every repeated word, every awkward pause that eventually turns into flow contributes to long-term confidence. There is also a hidden power in mistakes that is often overlooked. Mistakes make learning personal. A corrected word stays longer in memory than a word learned perfectly the first time. The brain pays more attention to errors because they create emotional impact. That emotional impact strengthens recall. So in a strange way, mistakes become stronger teachers than success. They leave deeper marks in the mind, shaping future communication in ways that smooth learning cannot always achieve. When someone stops fearing mistakes, their entire relationship with speaking changes. They begin to experiment more with language instead of avoiding it. They try new words without hesitation. They form sentences without constantly checking for perfection. This experimentation is what leads to fluency. Because language is not memorized, it is lived. It grows through usage, not through silent study alone. And usage always includes error adjustment and retrying. In many ways, mistakes also build resilience. Each time a person survives the discomfort of making an error in front of others, they become slightly stronger. The fear that once felt overwhelming begins to lose its power. The mind learns that nothing catastrophic happens after a mistake. No one stops listening. No one judges as harshly as expected. Life continues normally. This realization slowly dissolves fear and replaces it with courage. And courage is the foundation of speaking freely. Even the smallest mistakes carry value. Mispronouncing a word teaches pronunciation. Using the wrong tense teaches grammar awareness. Forgetting vocabulary teaches recall under pressure. Every error is targeting a specific weakness and bringing it into awareness. Without this awareness, improvement would remain invisible. So mistakes are not obstacles. They are diagnostic tools that reveal exactly where growth is needed next. When learners begin to accept mistakes, instead of resisting them, they start to speak more naturally. The pressure of perfection disappears, and expression becomes more important than correctness. This shift allows thoughts to flow without interruption. Ideas become more important than structure, and meaning becomes more important than form. That is where real communication begins to take shape, where speaking stops being an exam and starts becoming a conversation with life itself. Surrounding yourself with English is not about forcing yourself into pressure. It is about gently allowing the language to enter your life until it no longer feels like an outside subject, but like a familiar presence. Many learners treat English as something separate from their daily routine, something that exists only in books, classrooms, or exams. That separation creates distance, and that distance creates fear. Because what feels unfamiliar often feels intimidating, and what feels intimidating often feels impossible. But when English becomes part of your environment, it slowly loses its power to scare you. Language is not only learned through studying rules, it is absorbed through exposure. Just like a plant does not grow by being forced, but by being placed in the right environment of sunlight and water, the mind also absorbs language naturally when it is surrounded by it consistently. Listening, seeing, and experiencing English in everyday life creates a natural rhythm in the brain. Without even realizing it, patterns start forming. Words start making sense without translation. Sentences start becoming familiar without memorization. This is how comfort replaces confusion. One of the most powerful ways to surround yourself with English is through listening. When you listen to English conversations, songs, podcasts, or even simple dialogues, you are training your ear to recognize patterns. At first, it may feel unclear, like noise without meaning. But consistency changes everything. The brain begins to pick up repeated phrases, common structures, and familiar sounds. Slowly, what once felt foreign begins to feel recognizable. And recognition is the first step toward confidence. Watching English content also plays a deep role in this process. When words are combined with visual context, understanding becomes easier. Facial expressions, actions, and situations help the mind connect meaning to language without effort. Over time, subtitles become less necessary, and the mind starts predicting what is being said before it is fully spoken. This prediction ability is a sign that the brain is adapting to the language naturally, without pressure. Speaking to oneself in English is another quiet but powerful method. Many people hesitate to speak English with others, but they forget that communication does not need an audience to begin. Thinking aloud, describing daily activities, or simply forming sentences in private creates a safe space for practice. In that private space, there is no fear of judgment, no fear of correction, only exploration. And exploration is where confidence is born. When a person repeatedly uses English in their own thoughts, it becomes less of an effort and more of a habit. Changing the language of small daily tools also helps in building familiarity. Setting a phone to English, reading simple instructions in English, or noticing English words in everyday surroundings creates micro-exposure. These small interactions may seem insignificant, but they accumulate over time. The brain does not learn only from big lessons. It learns from repeated contact. Every small encounter with English strengthens recognition and reduces hesitation. Another important aspect is allowing English to exist without pressure. Many learners feel they must understand everything immediately, but language learning does not work that way. It is a gradual unfolding. At first, only fragments make sense. Later, those fragments begin to connect. Then sentences become clear. Then conversations become understandable. And eventually, thinking begins to shift naturally. This process cannot be rushed. It can only be experienced. Surrounding yourself with English also means letting go of the fear of not understanding everything. Confusion is not failure. It is part of exposure. When a person remains patient with confusion, understanding eventually follows. But when confusion creates panic, learning stops. The key is to stay present with the language even when clarity is missing, because clarity always arrives after familiarity. Over time, something subtle begins to happen. English stops feeling like a subject and starts feeling like a medium. It becomes a way to express thoughts, not a barrier to overcome. The mind no longer translates from one language to another. It begins to think directly in English. This shift does not happen through force, but through constant, gentle exposure. And exposure, repeated daily, transforms unfamiliar sounds into natural expression, turning hesitation into recognition and recognition into ease. Speaking even when your voice shakes is where real transformation begins. Because confidence is never a starting point, it is always a result. Most people wait for a moment when they feel ready, when their voice feels steady, when their thoughts feel organized, when their fear completely disappears. But that moment rarely arrives. If you wait for fear to vanish before you speak, you will remain silent for a very long time. Fear does not disappear first. It slowly fades only after you begin speaking through it. A shaking voice is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are stepping into something new, something uncomfortable, something that your mind has not fully adapted to yet. Growth always carries discomfort. The first time a child tries to walk, their legs shake. The first time someone learns to ride a bicycle, balance feels uncertain. Yet no one tells that child to stop because they are shaking. Instead, that shaking is seen as part of learning. In the same way, a trembling voice is simply the beginning stage of becoming fluent, not the end of your ability. When a person speaks English with fear, the mind often magnifies the situation. It creates imagined scenarios of judgment, embarrassment, or rejection. The heart starts racing, the breath becomes shallow, and the voice becomes unstable. But what is important to understand is that most of this intensity exists only inside the mind. In reality, the world is far less harsh than our fears make it appear. People are usually focused on understanding the message, not analyzing every word. This realization slowly weakens the power of fear, but only when speaking is actually attempted. The moment you speak despite the shaking, something important shifts inside you. You prove to yourself that fear does not have control over your actions. That single act of speaking becomes more powerful than any grammar rule or vocabulary list. Because courage is not learned by reading, it is built by doing. Each time you push your voice out despite hesitation, you are training your mind to tolerate discomfort. And tolerance of discomfort is the foundation of confidence. There is a hidden strength in the first few seconds of speaking when your voice is unsteady. Those seconds represent resistance against silence. They represent a decision to move forward instead of stepping back. And even if the sentence is imperfect, even if words are broken, the act itself creates progress. Because language is not only about correctness, it is about expression under pressure. If you can express yourself while afraid, you are already building real communication skills. As you continue speaking through fear, something begins to change gradually. The shaking reduces not because fear disappears completely, but because familiarity increases. The brain starts recognizing that speaking is not dangerous. It learns that nothing harmful happens when words are spoken, even imperfectly. This learning process is slow, but it is powerful. Repetition turns fear into routine, and routine slowly transforms into ease. Many people underestimate how strong their voice actually becomes when they continue speaking despite nervousness. At first, the words may come out unevenly, but over time, they begin to stabilize. Sentences start flowing more naturally. Thoughts become easier to express. The mind stops overthinking every word and starts focusing on meaning instead. This shift happens only because the speaker did not stop at the shaky beginning. There is also something deeply freeing about accepting that your voice can shake and still be heard. It removes the pressure of performance. You are no longer trying to impress. You are simply trying to communicate. And communication is far more important than perfection. When this mindset settles in, the fear of judgment begins to lose its intensity. You realize that expression matters more than approval, and clarity matters more than flawlessness. Speaking through fear also builds emotional strength. Each time you survive a moment of discomfort, your inner resilience grows. You begin to trust yourself more. You begin to realize that even if you make mistakes, you can still continue speaking. That trust becomes the backbone of confidence. It does not develop from theory, it develops from experience. Even the hesitation in your voice carries meaning. It shows that you are trying. It shows that you are learning. It shows that you are not allowing fear to silence your potential. And over time, that hesitation becomes less frequent, not because it was forced away, but because you continued speaking long enough for comfort to naturally replace fear.